The meme cookies from the State Department is still being used by Russians. It has become the part of Russian popular culture.
First of all, there were sandwiches. Let's just be clear.
Yes. Let's go there. Not cookies, but sandwiches. Do you regret that was some kind of, I don't know, or on the contrary, do you think that was a good PR, bad PR? What are your emotions about that little episode and such disproportionate consequences for the propaganda?
Look, I was an assistant secretary of state. I was a nobody. I was a Mielich, right? And the fact that Putin was so threatened by all of this that he actually made me a star, just, I thought, spoke massively to Russia's own, Putin and his team's own insecurity about losing Ukraine and about not only the money that they were siphoning off of Ukraine because, you know, they have huge business interests and they were ripping it off, but the fact that Putin had managed in all those years to maintain political control over the body politic, and that if they lost that, what it meant to him. Because Ukraine was not interested in anything outside Ukraine. They were interested in a more free and less corrupt Ukraine. And that's only a threat to Russia if a cleaner, less corrupt Russia, the way Putin is running it, is a threat to his leadership. So I thought it was sort of a bizarre act of desperation. And just to remember that, you know, all the Western leaders and the younger folk were visiting both the government, the opposition, and the folks on the Maidan at that period. The day that we delivered the sandwiches was right after the night when the Berkut security police, with Putin's encouragement and on Yanukovych's orders, surrounded the folks on the square, and they didn't fire on them, but they started squeezing in on them. And these were 18, 19-year-old Ukrainians who were being ordered to move against their own people. So it had been a very difficult and violent night. So, you know, my instinct was maybe there's too much Slavic culture in my instinct here, but people have suffered, and therefore you shouldn't go empty-handed to see them the next day. So that was how we took the sandwiches. But we also gave them to the Berkut. There's a picture of me giving sandwiches to the Berkut. So it was just, you've all had a rough night. Let's work on this together. It wasn't, you know, United States is directing Ukraine. It was Ukrainians directing Ukraine. Yeah. So, but the fact that they had to make such a big deal out of it, and the phone call too, was just, you know, so.
But after that, so we have that image of the United States organizing the, as they call it, a coup in Ukraine, and then there is Crimea occupation, then Russian troops invade the
Crimean theft, let's call it what it is. The theft of Crimea by Russia.
Then Russian troops come to Donetsk and Luhansk regions, and we see that the negotiations start, and the United States are not involved. Somehow all the process were with France and Germany and Belarus somehow. Lukashenko as a mediator sounds like a joke, but why Americans were not a part of that crucial negotiation?
So I was thinking about that the last couple of days, Misha, because the origin of the European negotiating lead happened at D-Day. We were at Normandy with President Obama, Angela Merkel, must have been Hollande, I guess. And the leaders were between events and having a sort of a lunch. And President Obama's view at that time was, this is a European crisis. Europe should lead in its solution. And I remember watching him walk up to the other two leaders and say, this needs some negotiating. Are you guys ready to lead? And they said, sure. And, you know, that didn't work out so well. But as you remember, by 2015, both the European side and the Russian and Ukrainians were all stuck, and the thing wasn't moving at all. And there was a danger of a frozen conflict, which, is what ultimately happened before it became a hot war again. And both the Russian side and the Ukrainian side asked us to get more involved. And so I had been, as Assistant Secretary, working with the Foreign Ministry, but in a particular meeting that I was in with Kerry, with Putin, Kerry offered that we could become more directly involved, but that we needed somebody empowered by him to talk to, which is when Putin appointed Vyacheslav Surkov to work directly with me, and I did 7 rounds of negotiation, late 15, early 16, with him to see if we could negotiate a Russian withdrawal in exchange for a lot of political and economic autonomy for Donetsk and Luhansk. And we actually did okay in terms of the way the negotiation was structured. We were quite close. I would talk to him, then I would work with the Ukrainians, then I would work with the Europeans, and we'd try to reinforce what the Europeans were doing. But then it became clear that in 2016, Putin would wait and see who got elected in the United States before he would actually cut a deal. And we all know how that turned out. So,
what do you think about Surkov? Because he's such a symbolic and controversial figure in Russian history.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to vouch for what he's said about Russia one way or the other. It was interesting when
you worked personally with him, so
I worked very, very closely with him.
You have some personal emotions.
I worked very, very closely with him. We got to know each other very well. I do think that if Hillary had been elected, and if we had had more time, and if Putin had empowered him, it is possible that we might have been able to cut a deal, but only if Putin had been willing to actually withdraw from Ukraine. But when I first started working with him, he had never negotiated with foreigners before. He'd certainly never negotiated with a woman before. It was interesting. We had a journey together that might have gone somewhere, but the politics got in the way, and maybe Putin never intended to get out. Maybe it was just a way of sort of treading water to wait and see.
And speaking